Northport and Port Charlotte are the most affordable area in Southwest Florida. These two areas are right next to each other. Northport on the north side is part of Sarasota County, and Port Charlotte is Charlotte County. Despite being in different counties, they're kind of the same urban core, and on today's video, we're going to talk about this area, what makes it affordable, why it's one of the fastest regions of the country to grow. I recently spent an entire day doing rideshare in this area. I'm going to tell you my experiences and the concerns that people in this community have about where they live. Living in this area, you could easily work in Fort Myers or in Sarasota, but both require a fairly decent commute. Now, the Northport area has had a lot of growth, apartment complexes, car dealerships, businesses, and this has been able to bring some type of jobs to this area, because overwhelmingly the worst part about Port Charlotte, Florida is the fact that there are practically no jobs here. New apartment complexes are offering 1 bedrooms for under $1,600 and 2 bedrooms for under $1,900, and that makes it considerably more affordable than anything else in Southwest Florida. But these apartments are also more cheaply built and offer less amenities, so in reality, yes, you're paying less, but you're also getting less, apart from the fact that the area has less to offer overall. Finding an apartment complex for under $1,500 a month is almost impossible in Southwest Florida, so why do these options exist at this price tag in Southwest Florida? Today, we're going to try to discover what makes this area more affordable. Well, for one, notice that they have a fence around the construction site, and they also had to bring in this trailer with a camera. Construction site theft is a huge problem in this area. This is US 41. The first thing you're probably going to notice is that there's practically nobody on the roads. If this was Fort Myers, Naples, or Sarasota, US 41 would look like a parking lot with cars in all directions. But Port Charlotte and Northport are really a slower pace area. Well, they have an old saying here in Florida is that people literally roll up the carpets by 9 o'clock. In the case of Port Charlotte, you could probably make that around 7 o'clock. This area really is one of the most boring places to live. It's extraordinarily seasonal, and now during the summer, you can tell that literally nobody is in town. On top of that, if you're going to get something to eat, dinner, things to do, you better have it all wrapped up by about 7:30 to 8 p.m. because almost nothing is open as late as 9. Now, Port Charlotte used to have the reputation of having one of the most aged populations in Florida, but those days are far gone. Today, there's actually a lot of young people living in Northport and Port Charlotte. And in fact, while doing rideshare, a lot of my passengers, if not almost all of them, were actually in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. The age demographics of this area have changed, but the boring and soulless appeal of an age demographic hasn't. As you can see, US 41 is practically empty. In recent years, Northport has seen a huge explosion of population. In fact, about 2 years ago, they were the fastest growing region in the United States. So you would think a place that is growing in population would have a lot of diversity and good things going on. And while, to be fair, there are Puerto Rican, Cuban, Haitian, and other restaurants that you would expect in Florida, they all close their doors fairly early. Literally before the sun goes down, everybody's at home sleeping, and this probably makes this area one of the most boring places you could imagine in Florida. And with a demographic of youth growing, that means that the young people that live here don't have a lot of things to do, and that's also where some of the problems start. The goal of today's video is to understand why this area is so affordable, and to do that, we would have to start talking about some pretty negative aspects. But before we get into that, I want to make a positive notation about this area. The crime rate here seems to be fairly low compared to other places in Southwest Florida. And the passengers that I had with rideshare were some of the most pleasant, well-behaved passengers that I've had anywhere. The people here really are decent, well-behaved, good intention, and a lot less propense to criminality than in other places. The crime rates for Charlotte County are fairly low. The homicide rate for Charlotte County is 4.5 out of every 100,000, which is below the national average. And for the section that's in Sarasota County, the homicide rate there is 3 per 100,000, less than half the state average. So when it comes to murders and homicides, this area is below the state average. Overdoses in Charlotte and Sarasota counties are slightly above the state average, but not by much. So there isn't really a crime problem to speak of when you look at this area. Now, I spoke to the people that I had on rideshare about their community, and these were the biggest concerns that they have. Out of the 7 passengers that I had, 3 people told me that they felt that law enforcement was unjustly targeting them. 2 were Hispanic males, and 1 was an older African American. The demographics of this area have changed tremendously over the years. But unfortunately, the police practice of profiling people who look out of place haven't. If you compare the Port Charlotte and Northport of today to that of many years ago, the most noticeable difference is that this area has become more diverse and of a younger population. Thus, you would expect, if this is the segment of the population that's growing, that this is the segment of the population they should be catering to. Unfortunately, that's not how Florida works. Many people from the Miami metropolitan area have been moving here for affordability, and this has led to a lot of growth, new businesses. You have Cuban restaurants, Puerto Rican, Haitian, Jamaican. It's brought a lot of great diversity to the food scene here, and it hasn't contributed to an increase in crime. To be fair, when you look at the people, particularly the youth that has moved into this area, they are less propense to criminal activity than in other places. There's no excuse for this behavior from law enforcement. It's not analytical, it's not real, but basically the old people that are here want law enforcement to bother and pester the youth because they think that the youth is doing bad things, when in reality, this is probably one of the most well-behaved youths of anywhere I've seen in Florida. So while the young people complain about police profiling, the older people that I got complained about nonstop car racing. Now, I did notice driving through the city that there was like what I'm going to personally call gangs of motorcycle riders and other young people that get together to race vehicles. Particularly in the Northport area, this is a huge problem. They're young people that get together to race vehicles or do street takeovers. But go figure that this is a town where there aren't even restaurants open after 9 p.m. So the young people here don't have anything to do. So it's led to a lot of youth gatherings that are probably illicit. And when I say the word gang, I'm dead serious. To me, from my understanding, what I'm seeing here in Port Charlotte really are youth gangs. Because if you're doing something illegal and you're doing it with a group of people, that constitutes a gang. Law enforcement here has also been heavy-handed on targeting undocumented people for immigration-type arrests. In fact, the propensity of law enforcement to make those detentions here are much higher than other counties like Lee and Sarasota that have a larger population. The third next complaint is this right here on the right, abandoned construction sites. So for some reason that I don't understand, the number of abandoned construction sites in this area is abnormal. Some of these construction sites have been abandoned for years. It's definitely unsightly, and many people that live in Port Charlotte that I had as passengers pointed out to me the many abandoned construction sites that exist in their communities and how they feel it's unsightly and somewhat of a nuisance. And the final complaint that I got from my rideshare passengers was the homeless situation. 2 of my passengers complained about the persistent problem of homelessness in their community. Now, this is downtown Punta Gorda, which is just south of the Peace River. My passenger lived in the Port Charlotte Northport area, but they work here in downtown Punta Gorda. You can see a homeless person right there with a bicycle standing in front of this business. Now, this individual passenger works somewhere in the downtown area of Punta Gorda, and they told me that recently a homeless person broke into their business and stole items from within the store. He also tells me that every time they go to dump the garbage, they have to be very careful because for some reason the homeless people like to sleep inside the garbage cans. And when they go to dump the garbage, many times they'll dump the garbage onto a homeless person sleeping inside the garbage can. So homelessness is a huge problem for people here. I had 2 passengers that complained about homelessness. The other passenger also had a complaint that he says in his neighborhood there's people with bicycles and trailers that are up and out throughout the whole neighborhood up at night, many times breaking into their vehicles. So homelessness is also a huge concern for people living in this part of Florida. Not just homelessness itself, but the criminal activities that come along with homelessness. Homelessness is so prevalent that you literally have to look out for it while driving through the city. If you're along major roadways, everywhere you look, you'll see people with bicycles and book bags. These are going to be the homeless people. And they're also going to be going behind businesses, dumpster diving. Many times they're not sober and they'll venture right out into the road, forcing you to make a maneuver to avoid hitting them. Now, there used to be homeless camps in Charlotte County right behind this area here that were hundreds of acres. We did a lot of videos in there, but as of recently, the sheriff's department has put up no trespassing signs, so we won't be able to go back in there anymore to show you what's going on. Most of the homeless are starting to evict this area as a lot of it is now under construction. Thus, if you trespass into a construction site in Florida, it's actually a felony. So I can't really show you what's going on back there anymore, but you can see the signs that are posted. And I did see trails of bicycles going back there that were fresh. So some homeless people are still in these wooded lots, but I couldn't go back there and show you that because if I went back there now after the signs showed up, it would actually be a felony. So those were the concerns of the people that live in this community based on the passengers that I had on rideshare on this particular day. Now, a little perspective from my personal opinion. I think it's a great, fast-growing area. I really enjoyed my rideshare passengers. For the most part, they all seemed really decent. And I can't emphasize that enough because when I drive Uber in Sarasota and Bradenton, the area that I live in, which is just to the north of here, the passengers are not always that great. I was actually able to relax and enjoy conversation with the passengers, letting my guard down a little bit because where I drive, it's a larger area, more busy, more crime, more crappery, and you have to really stay alert where I live while doing rideshare. A lot of people will get in the car and they smell like herb, they're intoxicated, pushing violent, and this really wasn't the case with the passengers I had here. Now, I did stay Uber driving until late at night, and while I got 2 people that were drinking, they were just happy drinking. Overall, I have to say that the biggest thing that I pulled from the passengers is the fact that I wasn't afraid of them. They just seemed like normal people doing normal things, and that's a welcome relief from the crime-ridden crappery that I have to deal with in Bradenton and Sarasota, particularly late at night. So overwhelming, the people here seem more kind of down to earth, kind of more gentle. Just you can let your guard down and you can see that they're genuine people and they're not trying to scam you or put you in a dangerous situation. I had one guy that was kind of like a cowboy with the cowboy hat that wanted to talk about my truck warranty. I had another guy that was also a lesser degree of a cowboy. So you get some like really country people. So overwhelming, it was really enjoyable. Now, the cowboy guy gave me a $10 tip, which is very generous. The young people were not able to tip me, but that's usually the case for young people. I was really surprised at how many young people I got with rideshare. You know, I really expected this community to be elderly people, and I didn't get any elderly people, like I said, so that was kind of a surprise for me. Now, most of Port Charlotte and Northport is like a grid pattern like what you've seen on today's video, but they are starting to put in a lot of gated communities and subdivisions like this one right here. So it is starting to look more like Southwest Florida in that it isn't just these grid patterns of empty streets with empty lots and a few houses here and there. You're actually starting to see gated communities. So these areas look really nice. And I think the area where the large homeless camp is will eventually become a gated community like this. I just don't think the homeless people will be able to afford it. Now you can see that the streetlights here actually have solar panels on them. So it's definitely changing. I mean, it's starting to look more like Sarasota or Fort Myers and Naples here, and that's probably a good thing for this area. It still remains affordable, But when it comes to actually living here, I do have to voice some personal concerns about this area that to me are just kind of red flags. You're only making $14 to $16 an hour Uber driving passengers. That's kind of seriously low. And it seemed to be saturated with drivers while the sun was out. It was even difficult to get the few rides that came across. Once it got dark, it became fairly easy to get passengers. At around 9:30 at night, the app started to blow up with passengers, which means that the drivers are afraid to drive at night. It could simply mean that the drivers here are a bunch of fraidy cats who don't want to drive at night. It could mean that they go to sleep early. I'm not sure what the deal was, but around 9:30 the app seemed to go crazy. So probably a lot of the drivers here go to sleep early or they're afraid to drive at night. I'm not really sure what they were afraid of because after all, the passengers that I got were simply much better than the ones I get here in Sarasota and Bradenton. But regardless, I did think that the Uber driving here was significantly weak. There really wasn't that much activity. The activity was kind of structured around specific time frames, so Uber driving here full-time has to be a nightmare. The pay rate just doesn't really add up. You would think that there'd be a lot of elderly people who would need the service greatly, but the reality of this area is it's just young people who don't have a driver's license or their car broke down recently type of crap. I was shocked to discover that by 9 p.m. all the restaurants were closed. I mean, there was literally nothing open short of a Wendy's and a McDonald's type crap. I did find this food truck and it was 9 o'clock when I walked up to the guy. He did make my food kind of after 9, but I guess he didn't have a lot of customers, so he was glad that somebody showed up. And right after I showed up, somebody else did. But the point being that this town goes to sleep very early. If you're into nightlife or you don't go to sleep at 9 p.m., this town may not be for you. And living in Sarasota and Bradenton, I'm somewhat of a night owl. For me, this town's schedule simply wouldn't work. How little there is to do in this area for me is a problem. I've traveled quite a bit. I live in Sarasota, Bradenton. We were always in cities like Tampa and Miami and Orlando. So for us, being in bigger cities, living in a place like this would seem like extreme boredom. Now, when I lived in Lehigh Acres, Florida, Lehigh Acres is actually probably even more desolate and isolated than Port Charlotte in a lot of ways. But at least we had a lot of nature trails. You could go riding your ATV, and you were kind of close to Fort Myers, which is a bigger city. The problem is that when you cross that bridge, you're in Punta Gorda. Punta Gorda is literally tiny, and it doesn't have much going on. I guess the horrendous thing about living in Port Charlotte is that it's a small town. Northport doesn't have anything going on, doesn't even have a downtown. Punta Gorda is the only city that actually has a downtown here, and it's fairly small. If Port Charlotte were to be your home base, like let's say for somebody like me who traveled to Fort Myers or Sarasota, the issue is when you got back home late at night because you're going to have a massive commute, you wouldn't even be able to get anything to eat because everything would already be closed. And that for me would probably be a deal breaker for the city. So if your schedule can match that, you'll be fine. But if you're a night owl like me or somebody who works throughout the day and gets home very late sometimes, boredom is a real issue here. The nicest beach from here would be Boca Grande, and it's going to put you at about 40 minutes, and there's a toll road to get out there. It isn't a free ride. The beaches that are closer are actually kind of not that great of a beach. The sand's not really that great. It's got a lot of like black particles, which means it'll burn your feet off if you walk barefoot on it during the day's heat. They're not great beaches. The water clarity isn't much, and red tide can be pretty heavy in this part of the state during much of the year after a hurricane especially. Let's not forget that this area is hurricane central, so hurricane damage is part of life out here, which means if you're moving to this area to retire and buy a big, nice house, it would be a great place to retire. For the young people that are ending up here for affordability, which could be myself soon, because, you know, we are looking for affordability in Southwest Florida, and this is an area that offers it. I think the trade-off is just massive. I mean, this place is just pure boredom that has been purified. There simply isn't anything to do anywhere out here. It's an area that, despite a changing demographic, only seems to remember its past in catering to old elderly people, their schedule, their lifestyles and habits, and it hasn't adapted very well to the changing demographics that are choosing to live here. I think if this area were to better embrace the demographics that are coming here, cater to them, I mean, you're already seeing the businesses, Cuban, Puerto Rican restaurants, Haitian, Jamaican restaurants, you're starting to see the area change. There's been a lot of talk that the new Grand Theft Auto video game is going to feature this area, and if this area gets featured on a Grand Theft Auto video game, you can expect a lot more young people to continue showing up here, a lot more street takeover type scenarios and more car racing that you have right now. Part of the problem now is that this area I think is featured on Roblox as well, and that's part of the problem with the street takeovers and other car racing is that there's video games that depict this area, and with the new game coming out, the latest version of Vice City or Grand Theft Auto, whatever it is, this area being rumored to be on that video game, highly anticipated. When that happens, you can expect more of those young people to want to come here and reenact the stupidity that they play on video games at home. And that means that this area's demographics are going to continue to change. So the state of Florida continues to think that it's attracting elderly people. But if you look at the demographics, the growing number of people moving here are Hispanics and a little bit of a younger mix of people. And it could just be a scenario where despite the demographic shifting, the local government and the view on the economy and all the other things are not shifting, and it's leaving these people kind of misrepresented in a lot of ways. And that isn't healthy for the future of a community. A community needs to evaluate who's actually moving here, why they're moving here, what do they want from us, and what type of businesses and activities they need. And in the case of Port Charlotte, that doesn't exist. It seems like everything here continues to be catering the wants and desires of an elderly population that practically doesn't exist here anymore. And what's interesting about this area is that they're kind of stuck in time. Like, the demographics have changed, the race, the age, so many things, the types of people that are moving here, the types of businesses that are opening. Everything here would suggest that this area is changing and becoming something different. It already has, but they seem to not really understand that the changing demographics of this area are going to have to come with some serious changes. For example, police profiling, like I said, is the biggest complaint that people have here. People who are law-abiding and not breaking the law. And it's very frustrating for these individuals because they came to your community, they moved here, they're living here, they're working here, and now you're not treating them accordingly. And that's a big problem here in Florida. People who should be better appreciated, and they aren't. It's the reason why I left Naples, Florida, withdrawing a business and investments that I had in Naples because I felt underappreciated. A lot of the young people who have bought houses, started businesses, and tried living here in Port Charlotte are eventually going to get sick and tired of it, and they're going to leave. When you have people that are in your community or move to your community and they eventually feel underappreciated and they leave, these are resources that your community needs to have. And sadly, when it comes to the Port Charlotte and Northport area, I see mirrored here many of the reasons why I left Naples, Florida. Despite the fact that the community needed me, the community didn't want me, because these communities are like this here are trying to cater to an audience that isn't showing up. Imagine you throw a party and it's going to be a reggae party, but then when you show up, you look at the guests, perhaps you realize that they're more interested in country music. You play a few reggae songs and nobody's dancing, but you see people wearing cowboy hats and driving pickup trucks. Maybe it's time to change the tune to something people can dance to. If these people can't figure out which track they gotta play, pretty soon it's gonna be an empty house. You know, on my last visit to this area, I'm looking at this area with eyes to move here. After all, it is the most affordable part of Southwest Florida, the area that I'm from. I've lived north of here, I've lived south of here, I've lived all over this area. And Port Charlotte is the only place where me and my wife could eventually afford to buy a home in Southwest Florida. And it's the case for a lot of other young people like myself. A lot of the people that are moving here and buying homes and doing things in this community are no longer elderly, decrepit white people. But if you watch the things that are happening in this community, it's almost like they don't want those types of people to move there. They're not catering to them. Part of the problem here is that the few old white people that are left feel that all the people that are moving here are undocumented illegal immigrants, when in reality the overwhelming majority of these people were born in the United States. They grew up in the Miami metropolitan area, U.S. born citizens of Hispanic descent. These aren't even foreign born people, and they're being treated as if they were illegal. I've watched a few news conferences from the sheriff in this county, and it's practically disgusting how much racism they're embedding into the brain of the people that buy into this crap, when in reality, the truth is that this area is changing. The demographic of people that are moving here are younger, and the vast majority of the Hispanics that are here are legal. This area also has a huge European community, especially to the north. You have Warm Mineral Springs. Now in there, they have made a lot of immigration detentions. A lot of Europeans and a lot of South Americans that are living illegally in the United States have been arrested in this area for driving with no valid driver's license. There's nothing wrong with that. If you're illegal in the country and driving without a license, you get detained, you're going to get deported. The problem is that it's created a police profiling issue for people who are not illegal and are constantly being detained by law enforcement. And that problem has nothing to do with the current immigration situation. This is just endemic to this area. I've lived in Naples and Southwest Florida. This has been happening down here forever. It's one of the worst police profiling areas. And this area here simply isn't. They're just out of touch with reality when it comes to police profiling. And I live in Sarasota. Sarasota has per capita probably more detentions of ICE and immigration nature than Port Charlotte. It isn't the arrest of people who are breaking the law and getting deported. Here in Sarasota, if you watch my reports and all that, you'll see that on a daily basis, 3 and 4 people are getting deported. It isn't the action of deporting somebody who's illegal. It's the action of profiling people who are U.S. citizens and doing nothing wrong. The Sarasota Police Department, on the other hand, is detaining and deporting more people than they are per capita. And at the same time, the people that are here don't complain about police profiling. So the reality of this area is that they have inept law enforcement officers who are not doing a good job, and they're using tactics that are outdated and borderline unconstitutional, targeting and harassing people who are not breaking the law for the sake of the law, when the only people breaking the law is the officers who are harassing people that are doing nothing wrong. And it's hurting this community, because when you tell somebody what are the biggest concerns of living in your community, and the first thing they say it's police profiling, yeah, you got a problem. Just yesterday in Sarasota, there were 3 immigration holds placed on people. Is the community here afraid of police profiling? No, they knew who they were going for, they got them, and that was it. I haven't seen any press conferences about all the crazy illegals that are hurting people. No, if you break the law in Sarasota, you're going to get arrested and you're going to get deported, and that's all there is to it if you're undocumented. There's no need for a press conference. There's no need to put Border Patrol trucks out by the exit and scare people. No. If you're breaking the law, you're going to get arrested, you're going to get deported, and that's it. But here in Charlotte County, they've kind of made a clown show out of deportations, and they've kind of not been able to be proactive. And I mean, make a clown show if you're doing it proactively, but if you're not doing a good job at it, probably don't brag about it. But Charlotte County's trying too hard. So look, on the same day they got this Cuban guy out of Hialeah, no valid driver's license. But guess what? He's a U.S. citizen. This type of arrest is so common in Charlotte County, Florida. It's collateral damage. They were looking for people that were Hispanic that didn't have a valid driver's license, so they run into a Cuban from Miami. They pull him over, detain him. He doesn't have a valid driver's license. Turns out he's a U.S. citizen. Collateral damage. That's what this arrest is right here. The chances of you getting this type of arrest in Sarasota County is like impossible. This is not an arrest that happens naturally. It's collateral damage from police profiling. But regardless, on this particular day, the overwhelming amount of the arrests were all U.S. born citizens, with the exception of one Ukrainian woman who was a U.S. citizen. So the practice of law enforcement here is that they don't arrest white people unless they have no other option but to arrest them. Like this guy right here for a DUI. He's not even sober for his freaking mugshot. So it's the problem that they won't arrest white people in this area unless they absolutely have to. Simultaneously, you're having collateral damage, unintended victims of profiling arrests. So this is a problem that this community has. Other adjacent counties with better crime analytics don't have that problem. So you can't justify, like I've always said on my channel, if you could justify police profiling, it would make sense. But when you have a county that's adjacent to yours that isn't doing these clown shows and they have better analytics, and on top of that, they're having even more deportations than you without lack of due process, without police profiling, you're inept. You're failing. It's a clown show. It's the fact that on this particular day, Charlotte County Sheriff's Office tried to find an undocumented Hispanic that they could arrest, and they ended up finding a Hispanic that had no valid driver's license, but he was also a U.S. citizen. And in Sarasota, without any of these clown shows, they made 3 ICE deportation detentions. So there's a real stark difference in portraying that you're doing something by really horrible practices like police profiling that are a visual expression of people thinking you're doing something versus actually doing proactive law enforcement that works and actually has results. And in the case of Charlotte County, Florida, it's become an absolute clown show. Adjacent counties have better analytics, more deportations, and the people in these communities don't have to fear police profiling. So it's all one giant clown show.